Hi, I'm Ed McCullough, and this is Fresh Brewed. Today, on a very special Fresh Brewed, South Carolina State Senator Tom Davis joins us for a cup of joe. Tom has spent the last 8 years representing Beaufort County, and he gives us an update on his legislative efforts in Columbia. Plus, we take a closer look at the impact of the Jasper Ports. Hello, greetings, and welcome to Fresh Brewed. I'm Ed McCullough. Our guest is State Senator Tom Davis. Tom represents Beaufort County, South Carolina. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ed. Great to be here.
How long you been doing this?
In the state senate?
Yeah.
Elected in 2008 and sworn in January 2009. So I guess I'm in my 8th session in the General Assembly.
So you're end of your second term, you're running for another term.
Right. Elected in 2008, reelected in 2012, and up for reelection in 2016.
And you are running again.
Right, but I have no primary or general election opposition this time around, so I get a...
Because everybody figured it would be useless.
I'm not
to
sure
run against you.
I'm not sure why, but it's interesting to not have to worry about a challenger this time of year and see other people put their signs up and go out there and campaign and go door to door and whatnot. So I'm an observer and a spectator this time around.
And it's nice because it frees you up for the business of governing as opposed to the business of campaigning.
Although I like campaigning, though. I mean, I like going to people, explaining my ideas, explaining what I'm trying to do in Columbia, how I get things done, why I fell short. I mean, it's what I enjoy doing. So, and in one sense, I'm glad I don't have opposition. Any politician that tells you otherwise is lying. But on the other hand, if I had opposition and if I had to get out there, I'd be doing the thing that I like best. So, either way, it's fine.
But you still stay in touch. I am amazed. You really do an excellent job, be it on Facebook or coming out and having meetings. I find you to be incredibly accessible and communicating all the time with the constituents.
What I do every 4 years is I make sure that I go to each one of my precincts, and we have 60 or 70 precincts in Beaufort County. And so on a rotation basis, 3 or 4 times a month, I'll go to a precinct, meeting of 30, 40 people at a time and explain to them what I'm doing. The state senate districts are small enough where you can do that. I represent about 103,000 people. And so I have the ability to go into communities on a small scale basis and kind of talk about what I'm doing. And in Beaufort County, I really enjoy doing that because we've got an incredibly diverse population here, incredibly talented people from all walks of life, industry, professions, incredible wealth of intellectual talent here in Beaufort County. So, going out there and talking to them not only is a service and telling them what I'm doing in Columbia, but it lets me hear from them and their ideas. And I usually get more out of the situation than they do.
So you got your finger on the pulse, you got a mechanism, you get the feedback from the people. Do they tell you? Do they let you know what is the top issue? If I were to say to you, your last 6 meetings, you get the feedback from the people, the issue that jumps to the top of the list with them is?
Roads and bridges. I think, people want to see our interstate system brought up to snuff. They want to see our primary and secondary roads repaired. They want to make sure our bridges are safe. I would say in the last couple of years, that's been a predominant issue. Second to that would be how do we get the Jasper Port that we've been working on for 10, 15 years, and it's now finally being permitted by the Corps of Engineers. How do we get that across the finish line? How do we get the infrastructure put in the ground and create the jobs that are going to really raise the boats in Jasper, Hampton, Allendale, Colleton counties? So those issues are pretty much predominant here in Beaufort County.
Those counties that you just reeled off, the names of our counties that are really, they could really benefit by an infusion of, let's just say, higher level jobs.
You look at the problems, and say Jasper County, because that's the closest one to Beaufort County. You look at the education system, you look at healthcare outcomes, and it all traces back to jobs. It all traces back to the quality of life that people can have based on the income they earn. And so what we're talking about, the Jasper Port, so people get a sense of scale, it will have an economic impact equal to BMW, Michelin, and Boeing combined for Jasper County. That's the kind of economic engine we're talking about being developed in Jasper County. It's no longer a question of if, it's now when. We've begun the permitting process. That'll take several more years. then we're going to have to go ahead and start putting the infrastructure in the ground. But in 10 years' time, we're going to have a thriving port generating jobs and driving up income levels for Jasper County and the surrounding areas. Extremely important thing to be working on right now.
And yeah, I was going to go right there. You said Jasper County, but the ripple effect it's going to have a tremendous effect on Beaufort County as well.
Right. I mean, the wealth and the quality of life and the jobs that are created, they don't respect county boundaries. Those are artificial things. And so if you increase the per capita income of the people living in Jasper and Colleton and Hampton counties, that benefits Beaufort because these individuals need places to shop, to live.
They have money.
To go out to dinner, for recreation. I mean, you're right. You got people with disposable income coming into our area. And so really, it truly is something that's a win for all parties involved.
And it ties back to the other issue, which is the DOT and the roads, because when the port gets put in, there is going to be a significant need for additional roads.
You talk about, and people will know this right away when they go to Savannah and you go down 17, that long two-lane stretch of road that leads to the Talmadge Bridge. Extraordinarily dangerous, extraordinarily badly maintained, lots of accidents. And so yes, you're right, once a port gets put in down there, plans to 5-lane that Highway 17 into essentially 5-lane all the way out to I-95, those will come to fruition. Likewise, I-95, as you come in from Georgia, it goes from 3 lanes down to 2. We can see the long-term plans to make I-95 in South Carolina 3 lanes, accelerated in terms of time. So the more economic activity you have, the more private capital investment, the more jobs, the higher priority that our infrastructure has. So it's all tied in hand to hand.
When I read some of what you post in regard to your crusade, and it feels like a crusade, I feel like I'm watching a mini version of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington when I read some of what you write about your process and the DOT and the structure and the history and the edifice of what you go up against to make the changes that are necessary. How is that process going politically?
It's going well. I mean, you mentioned DOT, and so let's kind of, as I say, review the bidding a little bit here, the facts that are important to the debate. When I first went into the Senate in 2009, we spent a total of $1 billion that year on roads and bridges. This year in South Carolina, we're going to be spending $2 billion a year on roads and bridges. So in the 8 years or 8 sessions I've been in the Senate, we've seen funding for roads and bridges go from $1 billion a year to $2 billion a year. Now, what you haven't seen are our roads and bridges get put in better repair. And the reason is, on the expenditure side of the equation, the people making the decisions on how to spend that money, it's very politically driven and controlled essentially by 2 people, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. They make the decisions by and large in regard to where that money goes. And so for many years, the first few years I was in the Senate, you had a Speaker of the House from Charleston and a President of the Senate from Charleston, and most of the money went into the Charleston area. Now we've got a President of the Senate and a Speaker of the House that are from the PD or the Florence part of the state, and that's where most of the money goes. The fire hose of spending has sort of been moved counterclockwise up into the PD. My argument has been this: before you go back and ask for higher taxes, before you put more money into the system, let's fix the system. Let's fix the way dollars are being spent, because it makes no sense to put more water in a bucket when the bucket's got a hole in it. You got to fix how we go about spending existing dollars. Once you make those fixes, once you have dollars being spent in accordance with needs, then we can have a rational discussion about what extra money, if any, you need. But what was being proposed, Ed, up in Columbia, was that we simply raise the gas tax by 75%, from 16 cents a gallon to 28 cents a gallon, put that money into the system, and just step back and hope for the best.
Let it go where...
And so what I did was I took to the well of the Senate and I began filibustering. And filibustering in the Senate means you can keep on talking, and unless 2/3 of the senators vote to sit you down, you keep on talking. And so I talked for 3 weeks straight, and eventually just said to them, look, we're not going to raise taxes. We're not going to dump more money into a broken system. We're going to fix what we have first, demonstrate to the people of South Carolina we can spend their money in accordance with needs. And if we do that, then let's make the case about whether extra money is needed. But don't put the cart before the horse. Eventually, the Senate came around to my way of thinking. They dropped the gas tax hike, and they agreed to make the changes to the way we spend the money. So I would think that would be a win in today's day and age.
You remind me of Jimmy Smith. Jimmy. What's his name? Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart. Well, but again, it's what I've learned about politics and political capital is that if you learn about something, if you study something, and then you have passion and conviction, and you're up there and people see you as authority on that subject, they tend to listen and to fall into line. I mean, and people often talk about, well, if you waste your time or you spend your capital on roads, for instance, or looking to reform the way we spend money, doesn't that take away from the political capital you have, for instance, to get the Jasper Port accomplished? But it's the exact opposite. Political capital wastes away if you don't use it. It's by using that capital and developing a reputation that then enhances your stature and allows you to lead on other subjects. So it's counterintuitive. It's not like you're hoarding some capital and you've got to spend it very wisely because you've got to pick and choose. It actually works the other way.
Stay tuned, more Fresh Brewed right after this. So we talked a little bit in the first segment about the process and the politics with the Department of Transportation. Let's shift that whole concept over to the Jasper Port, because politics, oh my goodness, you've got different states, You've got a competing port or ports, Charleston and Savannah. You got input from them. Do they want it? Do they not want it? You've been working on this how many years?
Over 10. I first started out when I was Chief of Staff for Governor Sanford, and actually it was when I was Chief of Staff for Governor Sanford that the two states got together on a joint effort to make the Jasper Port happen. And I think what we need to realize is where it's located first. If you go down Highway 17, like you go into Savannah, right before you get to the Talmadge Bridge, you would hang a left and then go down the river line about 4 or 5 miles, and that would be the Jasper Port.
And would that be the way that you will access the port?
Right.
And here we go. My goodness, that road, and just to orient a little bit more, if you come out of Old Town Bluffton and you're on 46 and you're going that back way to Savannah to the Talmadge Bridge, that 2-lane road, both of them really.
It would be that 2-lane road, Highway 17 toward the Talmadge Bridge, would be 5 lanes, made 5 lanes. And then you'd have to construct the road, not a frontage road, but an access road down the river for about 5 miles to get to the Jasper Port site, which is about a 1,500-acre site, tract of land on the Savannah River. So it's about 7 miles closer to the ocean than the Savannah Port is. And it's got advantages over both the ports in Charleston and Savannah, because both those ports in Charleston and Savannah, there's bridges that you have to get under if you're a ship. You've got to get under the Arthur Ravenel Bridge in Charleston or under the Talmadge Bridge in Savannah. And the new generation of ships are upwards of 19,000, 20,000 units per ship. Charleston
Shipping
and Savannah
containers.
Right. The Charleston and Savannah boats can only be 14,000 TEUs or 20,000 20-foot equivalency units or less because of the height of the bridges. You can't get underneath them. And so Jasper County has a unique market. These new generation of ships that have 19,000, 20,000 units on them, they can't get into Charleston, they can't get into Savannah, but they can get into Jasper County. So that's a unique niche that Jasper County can fill in the years ahead.
And once they get into Jasper Port, what about access to transportation, be it rail or highway I-95 or what have you?
Yeah, we've got dual rail access we're going to have to the Jasper Port. Both Norfolk Southern and CSX rails have lines in the vicinity. So one of the things we're working on is getting those rail lines extended down to the port site. And what we intend to do is this, is build a 21st century port with all the modern technologies, so where the ships, the boxes on the ships can be unloaded right onto the rail cars and then taken right into the interior. And there's a lot of things you can do at the Jasper Port site because it's a blank slate. You don't have to work around a municipality or an urban area, but you can put in something that makes a lot of sense. And so, but the problem is, the folks in Charleston and the folks in Savannah, they see any business going somewhere else coming out of their hide. I mean, they're just congenitally made up that way. So any business that goes somewhere else.
But that's a misconception, don't you believe?
Well, from their standpoint, it is. I mean, because they've got maximum capacity. They can't handle these ships that have the larger cargoes. But still, on a political basis, they're going to fight it every step in the way. And quite frankly, if Charleston and Savannah could kill the Jasper Port, they would.
But so they can't.
Well, they have historically, but over the last 10, 15 years, enough political attention and enough business community attention has been brought to this issue, drawing out and telling people about the natural advantages of this port, talking about the limitations that both Charleston and Savannah have, talking about the need to plan for the future, that we've gotten to a critical mass to where we're now moving forward. The Jasper Port is being permitted by the Corps of Engineers now. We've begun that process.
And that's a really critical stage in the evolution of the process. You get that permit and there's really no going back.
Absolutely. And then what you would do, Ed, is that once you get the permit in hand, you would then let it out for bid to third parties and have, a Maersk Sealand or an Evergreen shipping line or a stevedoring company, having them come in and spend the $2 or $3 billion of private capital to build that facility. I mean, that would be the plan. Once you get the permit in hand, once you get the highway infrastructure to the port, once you get the rail access there, you let it out for bid on a 40, 50-year lease basis, and you say to these private companies, you put the capital in the ground, you build the port facility, you run it, and in turn we'll give you a 40 or 50-year leasehold to go ahead and operate on there. So that's the plan for the Jasper Port, and what people need to realize is this is going to happen now. Everybody is in agreement that it's going to come online in the next 10 years, and it's going to make a tremendous economic difference. I mean, as I said earlier, you look at what BMW has done for Greenville. You look at what Boeing and has done for the Charleston area. That's what's going to happen for our area. We're going to finally see those sorts of good blue-collar jobs coming into Jasper, Allendale, Colleton, Hampton. And then what you're going to see is our school system get better. You're going to see healthcare outcomes get better. You're going to see roads maintained because you're going to have the activity and the wages there to support it. So it really is the most important thing I can work on is make sure that that port becomes a reality.
And just by way of clarification, relative to Charleston and relative to Savannah, in terms of the access to I-95 and the truck routes, if you will, it will be advantageously situated?
Yes, it would. And one of the things that your listeners need to realize is that I've been working on this for 10 years, and I worked on it side by side with Clementa Pinckney. Clem represented Jasper County. He and I worked side by side, first when I was in the governor's office and he was in the state senate. Then we were both in the state senate. I mean, we got it moving along to the point where now, last November, we actually saw permit applications filed with the Corps of Engineers. And it's just a cruel irony that he's not here to see the fruition of all this hard work. I mean, tragically, he was murdered almost a year ago, and he's not seeing...
Just for those who don't know, in the shooting at the AME Chapel, Emmanuel, in Charleston about a year ago. Why was this so important to Clementa?
Well, because he knows firsthand that if you're talking about improving education outcomes or healthcare outcomes or infrastructure in Jasper County, it's all tied back to jobs. It's all tied back to living wages. It's tied back to a woman in Ridgeland not having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I mean, all these things add up cumulatively, and I think he realized that. And the one thing that I think we can do, and I'm going to make a big push for this in Columbia, is that when we do build that facility, and we are going to build this facility at Jasper County Port, we should name it the Clementa Pinckney Terminal because of the work he put into it, because in memory of him, so people can realize and forever remember that he took an idea, something off the drawing board, and put it into process, and I think that'd be a fitting way to remember him.
I want to jump subjects. I want to go over to medical marijuana. You are a Republican, but when I think of strong advocacy for medical marijuana, I think Democratic Socialist.
Well, I mean, it's consistent, I can say, with my philosophy of trying to pass laws that increase individual liberty and freedom. So it fits right in with my own political philosophy, whatever label you want to put on it. But in terms of how I got there, there was a constituent who contacted me about 2 years ago named Harriet Hilton, who said that she had a granddaughter named Mary Louise who was 6 years old and lived in Charleston. And Mary Louise had over 100 seizures an hour, I mean literally an hour. And she had epilepsy. And none of the pharmaceutical medications that were prescribed to her provided any relief. But what the family knew was that cannabis oil, or a derivative of cannabis called CBD oil, provided relief. And it took away the seizures. The problem is federal law prohibits cannabis in any form from being used for medicine, and South Carolina law prohibits it from being used as medicine. So Harriet Hilton asked me if I would file a bill that would legalize or authorize doctors to prescribe CBD oil. And so I drafted that bill and ultimately got it passed. Now, the reason I got it passed was CBD oil is a derivative of cannabis that doesn't have THC in it, or very little THC.
THC, tetrahydrocannabinol.
Which has the psychoactive component of cannabis, and it's what makes you high. And CBD is the other chemical component of cannabis, but that has the interaction with the brain that really curbs epilepsy. And so the way I was able to get that law passed was I went to the upstate and explained to social conservatives that you need to be worried about this cannabis. It has trace amounts of THC. It's high in CBD oil, and these are the healthcare outcomes we have for these epilepsy patients, and so we got that law passed. Now I'm going back for another bite at the apple, because some of the therapeutic uses of cannabis are dependent upon there being some degree of THC. The THC interacts with,
for instance,
PTSD, for instance. Individuals,
post-traumatic stress. Soldiers coming back
Correct.
from the war and they want to
Correct.
avoid flashbacks and a whole bit.
And correct. And so what I've drafted is a bill that is a very strict bill. We're not talking about recreational use in South Carolina. We're talking about it being a controlled substance that's authorized by a doctor, that's tightly regulated by the state. And the fact of the matter is this: a lot of medications that are cannabis-based have tremendous therapeutic qualities, and yet in South Carolina we can't prescribe them, but opioids are okay. I mean,
crazy
Oxycontin
is
and
that,
Percocet.
right?
And so what I try to point out to individuals in the state Senate and in the House is that we're talking about something that if a doctor makes a diagnosis and certifies that it could be of therapeutic benefit, why in the world would you want to stand in the way of what that doctor is specifying for a patient? Why do you want to have 170 politicians up in Columbia making those choices? Why wouldn't you want it to be the doctor who actually meets the patient and has an opinion on what could be of therapeutic benefit? And so it's breaking down some of these social stereotypes that people have. And what people need to remember is this: the states that have legalized it for recreational purposes, the state of Colorado and Washington State, for instance, that's only been after a statewide referendum. Okay, so we're not talking about recreational use coming to South Carolina. The second thing I point out to the legislators up in Columbia is this: 75% of Democrats have indicated in a ballot question that they favor legalization of cannabis for medicinal purposes
In South Carolina.
In South Carolina, and 70% of Republicans have stated that they favor, in South Carolina, have favored cannabis for medicinal purpose. So if you've got
For medicinal, not for recreational.
So what I say to legislators is, look, the people are way ahead of you on this issue. If you've got 75% of Democrats and 70% of Republicans saying that something should be legalized for medicinal purposes, who are we to stand up there in Columbia and not do
represent
it?
your constituents.
And so it's a matter of education. And what I've been doing lately, Ed, is bringing stories to the floor of the Senate, 5 minutes every session, talking about a South Carolinian whose life is adversely impacted by not being able to get the medicine the doctor has prescribed to them. And telling those individual stories, I think, brings it home to lawmakers in a way that ultimately will help us get this thing passed next year. I'm very optimistic about it. I've seen the difference it can make in people's lives. I've seen the therapeutic qualities. I've talked to the doctors. I mean, it's something that will happen. It's just a matter of time.
And as a Republican and as a fiscally responsible individual, have you indeed taken a look, for instance, at Colorado and seen that the tax revenues off of the recreational marijuana now exceed the tax revenues off of liquor?
There isn't any question, but again, I want to emphasize, I am not advocating in South Carolina recreational use. And the reason I make that point is that the opponents to having it approved as a medicine say, well, that's just a camel's nose in the tent, Davis. What you really want is recreational use. So I can be very clear at every step of the way, that's not what I'm talking about. It's not something that is going to be legalized for recreational purposes in South Carolina. But for gosh sakes, if we've got people who are suffering here in South Carolina whose pain can be alleviated by a medicine that happens to be based in cannabis, why in the world are we standing in the way of what doctors want to give their patients? It makes no sense.
Makes no sense. Where are we in the process, in the politics of that? Is it moving along?
Right. Well, 2 years ago, I got the law passed in regard to cannabis oil for epilepsy patients. I mean, we got that done. So that was a foothold. Now we're pushing forward for full medicinal uses, other conditions to be treated. And we ran into a roadblock. Well, we ran into a roadblock this year. Law enforcement's pushing back strongly. So we're regathering our forces. We're getting the message out there. We'll make a strong push again next January. I'm optimistic this gets done next year.
Tom.
Always a pleasure, Ed.
It is always a pleasure. Thanks for the great information and thanks for representing us so effectively up there in Columbia.
My pleasure.
We have been speaking with State Senator Tom Davis. Tom represents Beaufort County in the South Carolina State Senate. I'm Ed McCullough. This is Fresh Brewed. Thanks for being with us. see more, visit our website, freshbrewedtv.com.